Everyone, it's your boy Matt. This is a video which may be a draft, maybe something I publish. I need to describe a concept as I'm going through some military leadership ideas, because I need to explain things that I've learned through people who have trained me, who've had to learn the histories and the institutional knowledge which allows a large beast like the military to function. And the lessons learned from that are quite applicable to a whole lot of different situations. And today we're going to talk about fragging, because it's a concept which is highly applicable to a lot of the situations I've faced with just dangerously incompetent leadership in healthcare, and criminally incompetent and protected incompetence and protected violence and psychopathy. So fragging is the process of killing your boss, or it's usually used in the context of killing your military officer, and it's most famously associated with the Vietnam War. You had a lot of conscripts who were in a war which didn't make any fucking sense, and they were actively being exploited and being made to die in very ineffective ways for no real military purpose, quite often, in a quite different military. So during this era, it's before what was called the professional military was created, and our military was designed around having large amounts of conscripts who would be chucked into a regiment when we had a major conflict. It's called fragging because the process of killing your officer is easiest done with a frag grenade, because after you throw it into their tent or around them and it explodes, you get rid of the evidence and your fingerprints and all those things, whilst also being able to kill the person without having to be around when it happens. So it's a very useful way of doing it, and it's a thing which occurred relatively frequently because of the conditions and mainly the culture, because all these fraggings were avoidable, most of them. I'm going to talk about that in a positive behavior support context, because really when they're fucking doing it, if you get fragged, it's usually your own fucking fault. Okay? Right? So why do fraggings happen? A common thing which would happen is that you end up with a military leader who's going to get yourself and your platoon killed. They're just sufficiently incompetent. And there was also the frequent use of draconian disciplinary measures during the Vietnam War. This is an older military. Culturally, they were even worse than the current military we have today. And what would happen is that they might do a practice. I remember reading about a case where there was this guy who was required to dig a ditch and then fill it back in, and just to keep doing this practice. And he was like, fuck this, you're a cunt. And he fragged his boss. Now in that situation, unfortunately for old mate, it was easy to identify who the likely culprit was, and I think he ended up being sent to their military prison. But this is it's a practice which occurred in that specific situation, where you had an officer who had his guy in the field. They had obviously a cycle where they had a bad relationship, a bad performative relationship. And instead of sending this guy, even if he really wanted to a military prison to begin with, taking him out by Huey, because this was Vietnam and it was always possible to do those things. This isn't World War I and World War II where there wasn't that mobility. They had the opportunity to do that. And if he was both in the field, but in a situation where he had sufficient resources and time to be able to do this unnecessary draconian punishment, and then he got himself fucking killed. because he just didn't fucking, he was just shit at his job. And that's what happens when you're shit at your job as a leader. Now, I'm using this specific example, and there's going to be better examples of fraggings, and I'd love to spend some time reading the books. But when that happened, like, it happened in a context where we have a military hierarchy which is very authoritarian, and we have protections for people with that authority. There's a theory in political, which is referred to in political science, and there's a great book called The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker, and I think he gets into this idea in that, where he talks about the Leviathan theory, Hobbes' Leviathan. Now, Hobbes, he was a guy around 400 years ago, I think. Can't remember his full name. Like, remember, I've at some point in time, I've probably memorized this stuff and it's just gone away. But he had some very conservative ideas. But one thing that he did point out was that when the state has a monopoly on the use of force and violence, there tends to be more peace and less violence. Because if you violate the social norms of the people, not of the people in charge, you get hit. Okay, and the people in charge is the government. That's why we have issues with terrorist organizations in Australia. A lot of those organizations aren't even necessarily really interested in a whole lot, but they're going to be fucking tracked, monitored, and pushed into the ground, often just because they have a different ideal to the state. Similarly, with this, with what goes on there, like, there is an illusion that people get with authority when they feel like they're protected by this Leviathan, and they then start doing stupid shit. They cause unnecessary suffering to people. They get a whole lot of people in trouble and killed. Because think of all of the times there's been a dangerously incompetent leader, and this is what Vietnam has hundreds of stories of. Hundreds of thousands of stories of these incompetent officers just getting their conscripted poor soldiers killed. Like, there are hundreds of examples of this, and it often comes from people getting the illusion, like, think of all the times lives would have been saved if some bloke, if some, like, soldier who understood the lay of the land and the situation was taking things into account, and they realized, I'm sorry guys, we're just going to have to toss one in there. Right? Think of all the suffering which would have been avoided. And people, in power of authority, they feel like this is the worst thing about the military in general. Like, I remember being failed on a leadership assignment because I lacked, and this is what the form said, the training progress report said, a regal presence. So I achieved all of the criteria for success to pass the assessment. It wasn't even a thing. It wasn't even a criteria on the sheet, but I got failed for lacking a regal presence because I didn't go through these performative bullshit gestures which are associated with gentlemanly officer class conduct whilst I was giving instructions on this leadership training exercise. And I remember, like, I feel like I need to frame that TPR, because it was just like, that's a fucking memory there. That's a culturally lesson about different people groups right there. Now, if you have this, like, there's this posturing, there's these cultural weird shit which goes on, where you have people who feel like they have a codified position, a right to rule, and a membership in a social caste which is defined by Hobbes' Leviathan and this command structure. And this kind of thing permeates throughout society. We have a class system in Australia. There's a class system in every country, And I have found many of these middle class professionals to have similar kind of attitudes to these dumb fuck stupid Duntroon trained military officers who fought in Vietnam and got their heads blown off by their troops. Um, and it's because in the business world and all these things, if you're a manager and or you're a person who has been able to benefit from your social class and the privileges, the opportunities you have because you had better connections, had the institutional knowledge given to you for how to survive in corporate Australia. That's something I never got learnt. I've got the institutional knowledge from military, and it's not quite as transferable as you'd think. Um, but you have these these middle class fuckwits, and they they both expect, because they have this relationship where they're a manager and they have money and they're giving you the money to do work, that they somehow are in a different position socially to you are, okay? And they believe that they're protected by Hobbes' Leviathan. And unfortunately they are, because we have we all society is patriarchal, um, or or some other kind of arc, we can call it. I've dealt with some weird fucking matriarchies in psychology, and matriarchy, if I'm honest, is if I'm honest, perhaps even more toxic than patriarchies in my experience, because at least with a patriarchy, we have there's historically been this, you know, this idea of proper masculine conduct and confrontation and being a fucking man. What I find is that with these hierarchies in psychology and healthcare, is that I have all this general bitchiness with these women, and the strange fucking games they play. It's exhausting. But returning to it, like they there's this attitude and there's this entitlement that they don't expect to be at the receiving end of violence or a frag grenade or something like that. Um, and with my situation, I have been abused similarly to that gentleman who fragged his officer, and that officer can expect to be fragged. It's the same when police constantly harass communities, or we have uh, our idiot military leaders sending people to pacify populations overseas by harassing the civilians, those people are surprised when the people they send over come back in body bags because they were fucking with the local people, right? Don't harass people. Don't abuse them. Don't act in a way which uh, makes them feel as if they have any form of threat. Because if you walk around, even doing a presence patrol, and it's going to be interpreted by the people there as a hostile act, and you can't decide how you're going to be interpreted, and eventually someone's going to kill you. And that's what has happened in every overseas operation we've done: Iraq, Afghanistan, uh, Vietnam. We've done some stuff in the South Pacific which turned out okay. But that's also because though we had these very positive relationships with those people and those governments. But returning to my point, like, I have been subject to some very cruel and illegal punishments. So, for example, my company, I've previously worked for Humanity Health Group. What they did is that they started creating fake job advertisements, and they started creating fake job interviews for me to attend. And for them, it's, in their view, because they're part of this protected hierarchy, uh, this is something they're allowed to do. They can grind me. They feel like it's okay to make me live in a homeless shelter, and this is appropriate behavior for them. Like, and this is moral for a psychologist or health, uh, for a behavior for a psychologist or a leader in these fields to engage in. the culture of that organization, Humanity Health Group, is the worst I've ever come across, right? And that I'm remember I fucking just took on a fucking very publicly a fascist cult who had links to the fucking Australian Signals Directorate and offensive cyber warfare arm of our army, right? And I've done a cultural fucking reform program for the SAS where they were doing fucking bloodings and shit like that. Like, when I say Humanity Health Group has the worst and most toxic culture of any place I've come across, believe me when I say that. Like, this is something that these people do. So they created all these job advertisements. So I'm either giving them information or um, and these are all fake job advertisements, or I'm wasting my time applying for them. And you need to remember, like, so I'm being intentionally made destitute. They've actively engaged in a behavior to lead to that outcome. And that's something you should be killed for. And I don't understand why they don't expect that to happen. I don't understand why they don't expect to be fragged. It seems like there's just a lack of, I don't know, world wariness for these people, a lack of exposure to how the world works. And I think it's because they've gotten comfortable in their social class and they feel as if they're protected from the world because of it, and they're not. And they can't expect not to be at the receiving end of that kind of behavior after you intentionally do something like this to a person. And let me continue on with this point. What they've done is that I am meant to be allowed to go to job interviews. It's an interview. It's the same as a date. I go on a date, I decide if I like the girl or not. I go to the next one. I practice what it's like to go on a date, and then I go on another date with another girl, and we see if it works. They have the privilege these people have. They believe it's okay for them to stop me from going through the process of a job interview to figure this out. This is what they are okay with. This is illegal behavior. And they have publicly acknowledged this, and they've been very proud of what they've done. They've been very proud that they've created these job interviews and they've flaunted it through the industry. And they're expecting not to be at the receiving end of physical violence. And I find this puzzling. It's because the situation is that there's no legitimate means for me to fucking deal with this problem, because they are protected by Hobbes Leviathan. Like, I have been stopped from collecting money from people in the state to be able to fight these people who have done this terrible thing. I'm stopped from being able to get legal representation to be able to go through the very appropriate behavior of suing and rectifying this criminal act by them. And then how the fuck would you not expect someone to be killed or physical violence not to take place in this situation? And this is where I need to communicate to the police and these other authorities how violence takes place, because it doesn't seem to fucking click with these idiots. It's because they live in this protected Hobian world. That's a new word. But it's actually an illusion. And if you fucking abuse people enough, they're gonna fucking kill you. Right? That's something that's always on the table, mate. Right? That's a behavior which exists in every human society. And if you fucking misbehave badly enough and treat people sufficiently poorly, you're gonna get killed. Right? And I think this is something that these people need to learn very quickly if they want to avoid that kind of behavior on them. And I look at all left-wing traditions and like, yeah, no, I kind of get it. Like, we have social castes. We've got these people. We have a society which protects these people. The solution in a lot of situations is violence, because the state protects these people and facilitates this corrupt behavior. And then violence is a normal human behavior. It's something which is appropriate to fix certain problems. And I I don't understand why these people think they're safe, and I don't understand why they have any expectation that they're not going to be at the receiving end of violence after acting so criminally and being so openly psychopathic. Have a good day, everyone.